say verbatim what Professor Phillips just shared from her perspective, as I said on the kind of split subcommittees on supervision.
Okay.
It is an overarching part of the conversation as we discuss different incentives, different opportunities, recommendations for, having community corrections as well as court services when somebody is co-sentenced, different things like that. So echo what you said in terms of that being overarching, but having no solid decisions made at this point. There really isn't anything particular.
Yeah, still in the discussion stage. So, okay, well, without others on the call to really weigh in on other subcommittees, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is old business, which is the discussion we had last time. And admittedly, we've got a smaller group of folks here. Oh, I see Chad just joined us. So Chad Harmon, one thing you've missed though thus far is we talked about, got a quick update on other subcommittees, what they're doing vis-a-vis the issue of race. We talked about the diversion subcommittee and then the incentivized, I forget the exact term, but the incentivized supervision, incentivized based programs and supervision, that subcommittee. Without checking my list, Chad, are you on any other subcommittees that you could give us an update on?
I'm on the diversion committee that you guys have already updated them on. So,
okay. All right. Sounds like we're in. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, then I think we've gone as far as we can with the discussion of other subcommittees, unless someone else joins. So let's move back to old business, which is, I just took from my notes to set this agenda that the generalized topics we discussed. I put them in A through G, but A was law enforcement training, de-escalation, things like that. That was a topic of discussion in the first meeting of the race subcommittee. Standardization of law enforcement policies. I think Chief Ackerman mentioned that there may be policies with respect to whether it's a de-escalation policy, I forget, there's a term of art for it, but it's essentially an obligation to intervene. If you see something happening with another officer that shouldn't be, officers are supposed to intervene and they need to have a policy to that effect, things like that, those sorts of things could be the subject of a final report from this subcommittee to be sent to the Reform Commission. The third was legislation regarding the gang designation. I remember Sylvia Penner brought that up. That's being discussed in other circles around the state, but just for one in particular, the bail statute, I hope it got included in the agenda. KSA 216316 says if you're registered or on the gang registry in your community, felonies you commit, bond needs to be set at $50,000. And while there was I remember when that bill was passed in the late 90s or mid 90s, there was a thought that was necessary, but I'll be honest with you, at this point, if I'm got a guy on a homicide or drive-by shooting, I'm probably asking for more than 50, and I have to make my case for the bond or I don't. But a flee and elude just because it happens to be committed by a gang member, I'm not sure why we're setting the bond at 50 grand there. So I think there's probably some room for a discussion about, and maybe even a proposal that particular bill be amended to either just eliminate it or at least say, appropriate bonds should be set or something, as instead of having an arbitrary $50,000 number. But again, that was discussed. Traffic offenses, the impact that has on communities of color. Data collection, how do we better grab information during the course of traffic stops and contacts with law enforcement about the race, ethnicity, et cetera, of civilians that cops are interacting with. Co-responder programs, and then everybody knows what that is. And then the final one was that bill I discussed from Missouri. I went ahead and tracked it down, and it should have been included in the agenda. It's Missouri Senate Bill 53. It's this large omnibus bill, several subcomponents to it. Subcomponent I was talking about was what's called 547.031. You can look that up if you're interested, but basically what it does is it gives prosecutors in Missouri a legal avenue to move the court for a hearing if we are presented evidence or find evidence of innocence or that causes us to question the viability of a conviction, or something that took place in court. It seems maybe incongruous to some folks, but if we don't have that, if we're still in before judgment, we're in court, it's fine, it's not a problem. But after someone's been sentenced, the district court loses jurisdiction. I can't just go file a motion on a case the court lacks jurisdiction in, and that may not be a reason not to do it, but I think Missouri prosecutors found that they needed this to afford them a path forward when they have situations like this. So I've already talked to my folks. I know that I could come up with a draft of something like this that would be favorable to the prosecutors in the state. We'd like to have this. Don't want to be put in a position where the right thing should happen, but we don't have a door to walk through. So anyway, those are the topics. Professor Phillips.
Can we chat just for a second about that Senate Bill 53? I work with the Midwest Innocence Project, and they're working closely on that because they've got cases in Missouri. So Missouri doesn't have a 1507 statute that has the manifest injustice clause in it, right? So in Kansas, an attorney could bring that, a defense attorney could bring that petition.
Sure.
And the way that it's been working with Wyandotte County's Conviction Integrity Unit is they contact us or MIP and say, we think we have an innocence claim here. And then the attorney is the one who files the 1507 and triggers the jurisdiction. So my only concern, and I don't know why I feel this in my gut, is there has been attempts previously through the Attorney General's office to limit the manifest injustice prong of that 1507. And I wouldn't want this legislation to be a trigger to say, well, we don't need the 1507 for manifest injustice if there's actual innocence, because a prosecutor can do it now. I just want to make sure that we sort of think that through to make sure we preserve both of those prongs and that there's not fuel to try to, again, minimize the manifest injustice prong for actual innocence under 1507.
I understand. Yeah, I can see. I'm with you. I don't really I can't put my finger on what you're saying, but I can see your reticence there, and I don't know exactly how that would play out. I mean, the concern we've had is, what if somebody brought to my attention the fact that somebody, there was an actual claim of innocence, whether I agreed with it or not. What do we do in that moment? I figured a 1501 or 1507, something like that to get in front of the court, but the prosecutor doesn't have. I don't know. It's a point. Well, yeah, it's worth talking about. Maybe I don't want to get
right. Maybe not just right here is not the place, because but maybe you and I should. I don't know.
Yeah, well, because we're doing this, I was kind of thinking out loud here. Maybe what we almost need is a little. So we have the commission, we have the subcommittees. I almost wanted maybe a quick task force. We could set up a meeting of that. We could do it because it's open.
Right.
Technically, we're not voting on anything, so we could do it offline, but I'd rather have an open discussion if somebody really cared enough to watch. But let what you and I communicate, and if we can come up with maybe some case law, et cetera, because if it's not necessary in Kansas, great. I don't want to create an issue that doesn't exist, but I know in the back of my mind, I've always worried, what if a case came to my attention and there wasn't a clear path to get it in front of the court? Maybe I'm thinking about that rare occasion when it's still on appeal and the court has lost jurisdiction, the direct appeal is not yet done, so the 1507 can't really, the collateral attack can't take place. We're in that nebulous area. I mean, I could get with you in that weird situation. I'm sure we could find a path forward, but.
Right. I just want to make sure that we don't sort of say, well, we have this provision now, prosecutors can do it. We don't need the manifest injustice anymore under 1507, because there's been, I just testified this last session about limiting manifest injustice in the 1507s. And so I just don't want that to get sacrificed for new legislation is all.
Gotcha. No, it makes sense. Well, we'll try to get out of the weeds a little bit, because I think we probably.
Right. I understand that's really in the weeds.
No, but it's a conversation worth having. So law enforcement training, I don't see anybody on here who's law enforcement. So the truth is that's something they brought up, and I think need to take the lead on de-escalation. Like I said, requiring, again, there's a term of art for this notion, but it's something to the effect of requiring officers to step forward if they see something happening that shouldn't. That sort of thing. I think we're going to need Ackerman and Nelson Mosley and some of the other people who I think are some of the other law enforcement officers to talk about the best way to make that happen. Yes, I hear a voice.
Interrupt. This is Representative Owens.
Yeah, there you are, Steve. Go ahead.
We now have a new director of Kansas Sea Post,
Yeah.
former Heston Police Chief Doug Schrader.
Yep.
I wonder if it wouldn't be beneficial to maybe have him on at some point, this committee, and have him discuss what training is already done in these areas.
Sure.
Maybe at some point, and I think it would be beneficial to have him part of that specific piece of those discussions.
Makes sense. I mean, don't fix what ain't broke and don't overlook something that might need address. So
exactly, and he's very open to these conversations and willingness to kind of reevaluate everything at this point. So it's just something to consider.
no, it makes sense. Why don't we, on the next agenda or for the next meeting, I'll put 10 or 15 minutes in there for him to just let us know what's going on in terms of training, because it could affect several of the topics that were set on the old business part of the agenda today. So let me know if that works, and I'll include him if he's got time. If he doesn't, we'll do it another time.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, with a kind of a limited number of folks here today, are there other topics? Let's jump down to things like data collection, etc. Scott Schultz is on the call. With respect to felonies and journal entries of judgment, and I know that's where you get a lot of your information for the Sentencing Commission. Are there other things that, I don't know. When we're talking about sentencing, maybe that's not really the point. We get that information now. I'll ask you to speak on that in a second, Scott, but maybe we're talking about more like arrest reports or contact in the field before it leads to an arrest or certainly a conviction. I don't know. From your point of view, Scott, what information are you getting? Is there any deficits in this respect in your access to information?
Sure. Anything that you see on a felony journal entry, we collect. So all that demographic information, the information on the PSIs, many times we collect most of that information as well. So and a lot of that does include race, gender, other, as I said, other demographic information. So we are able to tell then, based upon the admissions data that we receive from KDOC, who's actually, what the stock population is at the end of the year, what as far as those admissions are concerned, just exactly what the breakdown as far as race is concerned, gender, that type of thing. So we do have that data. The arrest data would be kind of certainly the purview, I'm sure, of for the most part, KBI. But that would be if you were wanting to look in that direction. But otherwise, we do hold that type of data and report in our annual report as far as race is concerned.
Okay. So I saw Senator Haley jumped on. Senator, I'll ask you because I know this is a topic you're particularly interested in, but we're on the kind of two tracks here. We've got people who are in the convicted, arrested, contact in the field, in the street, arrested, charged, convicted. Okay, and either convicted and or goes to the penitentiary on probation or penitentiary. They stand convicted of a crime. That information's there. It sounds like Scott's getting a lot of information about that population. So I don't want to speak for you, Senator, but I don't think that's where the deficits lie. I think we got pretty good information about that group of people. If I understood you right, and what I've understood this conversation more is about, okay, people in the field, cops have contact with them. It doesn't lead to an arrest, or if it does, it certainly doesn't lead to a charge that would be tracked all the way to the penitentiary. So just contact with people in the community. You want more information about that. Is that a fair statement?
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is, and that's why I tuned in today. I'm not on this, this subcommittee,
Sure.
but that's you're why I'm here. I mean, that question is why I'm here as it develops and comes through the process as to what we will get by way of recommendation from the subcommittee to the full committee in terms of the tracking and how in-depth it is. You know, the whole disparity of it. I just got off with an AP reporter who is concerned about this very issue and who wants to see which way we're going from what is developed from the subcommittee and the commission and what is introduced. And I said, I just want to get to the end result that shows the disparity, the gross disparity, and how we reach that between our demographic populations and those that are currently prosecuted and incarcerated. So, yeah, that I do appreciate that. That's why I've tuned in today to this, and I appreciate your asking. And I look to greater minds than mine, like yours, Mr. Chair, and others who are on this subcommittee to develop how that language looks to address the disparity.
Okay. Well, I think what we need, sort of like, I'll echo what Representative Owen said a minute ago about, we had, I think just before you jumped on, maybe you were on, the discussion about law enforcement training and ways to ensure that de-escalation and things like that are a part of the ongoing training that law enforcement officers receive. And so to that end, Representative Owen said, well, why don't we hear from the new CPOST director? He would be in a position to tell us, what is the latest in terms of training, what is available, what is required, what could we do to supplement that, et cetera. Okay. Well, I think it sounds like maybe what we need to address this issue is to hear from maybe someone from the KBI, because as Scott Schultz says a moment ago, the information, how it's obtained, whether it's obtained, how it's maintained, and then thereby accessible is really in the purview of the KBI. And so is this a function of we're not having uniform information gathering in the field? Is it not, if that's not the issue, is it more in terms of getting it to the KBI in a fashion that they can uniformly, look at what's going on in all 105 counties? I don't know the answer to that. And so I'm wondering if maybe the next step in this discussion is hearing from the KBI on that. And then finding out, what would it take to get better information? I will say I've had this conversation in law enforcement circles. The only concern they have is, and not to get too granular here, but what is contact with a member of the public? You stop at a scene and go, somebody, what's going on? Oh, they're over there. Okay, and you walk off to the scene, because I saw the guy run that way. Thanks, and you run off. Do you need to stop and go, by the way, I've now had contact with you and interacted with you. I need to know your information. I mean, I don't think that's really what we're talking about, but I think that's the concern in law enforcement circles, is they just don't want to have a very amorphous kind of open-ended definition of what contact means. I think most of us think you stop somebody, you stop their stream of flow, whether they're walking, driving, whatever, you stop them to interact with them. That's probably more to the point. But again, kind of like the situation a moment ago that I had with Professor Phillips, we were kind of getting pretty granular in a very specific topic. This seems like a very specific topic as well. And I wonder if maybe a task force could be quickly put together, or maybe we just ought to put aside some time at the next meeting and hear from somebody from KBI about what they would need to. Is it a form that needs to be changed? Is it the way a form works that needs to be changed? What is it that needs to be changed so that we could have better access to this information? So what other discussions or thoughts do people have? I see a hand, Jennifer, over at CSG.
Hi, stepping in for Stephanie, so I know she had to leave unexpectedly. When you're talking about data, I know you talked about the arrest data, and then Scott, you had brought up the Sentencing Commission, and that's through their journal entry. And so I'm wondering about data around, you have the arrest, but then also the charging decisions, pretrial decisions around pretrial detention, and then diversion placement. And I'm wondering if the information that the Sentencing Commission has kind of covers some of that aspect, or if that's more at kind of court case resolution, conviction kind of point.
Sorry. Yeah, Jennifer, we have we have very little information of that. I will share with you on a yearly basis. KBI normally KBI operates on a calendar year, whereas many of us, as far as the data we receive from them, we operate on obviously the state fiscal year. So they cut their data at the end of the year prior to the legislative session, and we actually do receive arrest data, but it's not our data to give. So that's why we normally refer folks back to KBI for that information. And in fact, we have arrest data from them clear back to 1912. Granted, it's a little sparse, obviously clear back then, but we do have some misdemeanor and mostly felony arrest data for them. But as far as the diversion, pretrial charging decisions, anything like that, we're on the back end of things and don't receive. I don't know whether, I think OJA collects those in the aggregate as far as like number of diversions and that type of thing, but whether or not they can get detailed enough for you, that may be a question for Spence.
Well, the thing that occurs to me is trying to put together a new database is always an expensive undertaking because who handles it, etc. But something as simple as on the journal entry of judgment, for those of you who are not familiar with a journal entry of judgment in Kansas, it's a standardized form. Every jurisdiction is supposed to use the same thing. Sometimes it varies in whether people type it or write it by hand, but other than that, all the form is essentially the same. One thing we could talk about at some point would be adding, was the person released on bond? Is it just yes or no? As a data point on that journal entry. That way there's no cost to the state. There's no new database that has to be stood up, but you could find out, things like that without any, it'd be a minor change, but it would be substantive in terms of getting at some of the information Senator Haley and others are asking for. So that would be a discussion, I think, to have too, something as sort of mechanical as that, but it could get you a lot of information. So, okay. And I'm sorry, I may have cut you off, Jennifer. Was there something else you're going to add to that? Okay, thank you. All right. Well, good. Senator, or I called you Senator, Professor Phillips. Sorry. Not sure if that's good or bad.
Demotion.
I guess I want to come back to Chairman, the gang designation specifically with bail. That seems to me to be really low hanging fruit. Right? To the extent we talked about that before, like just go after low hanging fruit. I mean, it's crazy to me that if you have gang affiliation, and by the way, how do we even determine that? I mean, how do we even know what makes somebody gang affiliated? And so there's been conversations and litigation all around even getting someone labeled as a gang member and in those databases. And that's a whole nother story. But I mean, for that to be $50,000 bond across the board is crazy. And I think that would be something we could recommend with a great deal of ease to just.
Yeah, I think there's two paths forward. One is to eliminate it altogether, which is when you're talking about eliminating a statute and killing something, doesn't matter how much uniform, how many people support it, you're still going to get somebody to want to navel gaze out in the legislature. The simple thing may simply be to say, is that an appropriate bond?
Right.
And then you're done. I mean, I think that is something that could be done without any hyperbolic, consternation from anybody. So I tell you what I'll do. I'll grab that statute, put together a draft of it. I mean, because honestly, what we need to start doing here, given our short turnaround, is, hey, I'm going to ask for a vote on this. Everybody think we ought to submit this to the commission? Yeah, and I can just start rough drafting our final report. And like I said, that could be the first one on the thing. It's just the simplest thing out of the gate. So
right.
I'll do that and have that ready for the next meeting, put it on the agenda, have it as an attachment. Everybody can review it. And if we have some discussion, and we might be able to just vote that on through without any heavy lifting. So good point. I don't know that I see on that agenda of pardon me, on that agenda, here we are, sorry. Other things that are quite as easily or classified as low-hanging fruit is the one Professor Phillips just identified, but did anyone else have anything else you think would be a relatively non-controversial, simple to approach bill or change, or don't everybody speak at once?
Well, Chairman, from my perspective, I think we need to hear from the KBI just to find out if it's easy to tweak some of those forms so that they can track some of that information or not. And I also want to hear from, and I didn't catch his name, but the new director, to see what it is they're doing for, right? Are they already doing de-escalation? Are they already doing, you have an obligation to intervene when we see misconduct of another officer, or those sorts of things? I feel like I need more information on that.
That makes sense. So, all right, well, we're making progress. You know, we can keep doing, I'm happy to discuss anything, but let's just take a second here and talk about the agenda already for the next meeting will be the gang, the statute regarding bond or bail in gang cases, or where a person identified as being a gang member is a suspect. I will grab that statute, make a quick proposed change, have that circulated to everybody, and we can vote on that at the next meeting. That'll be topic, or, you know, after we go through the subcommittee reports, updates rather, that'll be the first topic of the agenda. And then depending on availability, we'll see if the new CPOST director could speak to us about training issues, what they are doing, what in his opinion they need to do. Ask, you know, come prepared with questions if you want to know what they're up to. Let's, you know, make good use of his time and ours. And then if we have time, I will reach out to KBI Director Thompson and see if he's got somebody who could speak to this issue of how best to enhance or at least bring to bear the information that is being collected or needs to be collected regarding race, ethnicity in terms of police contact, pre-judgment, pre-conviction, whether that's just an arrest, contact, whatever that means specifically. So we could hope to accomplish 3 things at the next meeting. Does that seem like a good use of everyone's time and a good plan moving forward? Okay. All right, back to the issue at hand though. What else can we try to get accomplished today? Anyone have any suggestions? I see co-responder programs. I mean, I was on the, what was it? I guess it was just the full commission meeting Monday, and Bill Persinger mentioned that we could have somebody come talk to us about how co-responder programs are working. My feeling there is, I think everybody who knows about co-responder programs knows that they're working. I don't know that we need to be edified about why that's a best practices or a substantive step forward in policing moving forward. The real question is, what could we as a subcommittee recommend to the commission, who could in turn recommend it to the legislature to make that more viable? Is it I mean, honestly, it's money, but assuming that's not going to happen, do we need a statute that encourages it, that sets up parameters, that, I don't know. So maybe we do need to hear from somebody who works in that field. What would have made it easier for you to start that in your jurisdiction? Jennifer, did you have your hand up?
I did. So at the Justice Center, our behavioral health division has a new kind of initiative called Taking the Call, which is all about innovative community responder models. So some of them aren't all co-responder models. Some of them are, you know, models where there's a community responder that doesn't necessarily include law enforcement. There is a national conference on October 20th and 21st around innovative community responder models that's taking place there's also been some information and resources put online, and I can send a link for that if you'd like, Chairman Bennett, for you to send around to the committee members, if that would be helpful. And if the committee wants, I can see about having a staff member from that project come and talk with the committee. Because I know the national conference on October 20th is a little far out for the committee to be able to use that in any decision making, but happy to do that if that's helpful.
Well, I know that, so for instance, 5-6 years ago, the big move was to go to like Axon body cameras, right? Seems tangential to this conversation, but okay, well, that seems obvious enough. Yeah, we should do that. How do you do that? How do you manage the data? And so DOJ and others put out like a toolbox, they called it. So if you're in a jurisdiction that's going to start using Axon, what questions do you need to ask just to make sure this gets off the ground without blowing up? I kind of have the same feeling about this. I'm sold on the idea. What's the tool? What's the first step one takes? Is it just, well, you got to get with your community partners? Okay. But is there something legislatively that could be done? That's what I'd really love to hear. Even if we just simply identify the fact that co-responder programs are a wonderful thing and we should all endeavor to do that, that's something. But if we have something substantive, specific, we can ask the legislature to do to make it happen, all the better. So was someone else going to say something? Senator Haley, you talking? You're on mute if you are.
Hello?
There you are. Maybe. Oh, he's tiling, so I think we lost him.
Mark, while we're waiting for him, my suggestion would be, and for whatever it's worth, obviously, Topeka Police Department has been doing the crisis intervention teams for some time. It would be interesting. You could potentially even corroborate recommendations from this subcommittee based upon the breakdown as far as race is concerned with them. If they're helping a larger percentage of the population or something of that nature, it would certainly corroborate the need for doing that. So just a thought, though.
No, I think that's great. So I tell you what I'm hearing is I think we've got quite a bit to discuss. We've talked about adding more commission meetings and other subcommittee meetings. I think adding too many task force meetings is just going to bog people down. I mean, there's only so many. We're all doing this on our own dime and out of our own, because we want to see this work. I'm hesitant to ask people to set aside more time for more subcommittees, or more meetings. Why don't we try this? I think to the extent anybody wants to be heard on a review or a discussion of what other subcommittees are doing, we'll keep that short next meeting. If something substantive, we give you the floor, but let's try to keep that to a minimum. And let's try to, this now gives me 4 things that we could have somebody come speak on. That could quickly get out of hand and turn into a 30 or 40 minute conversation, I know. But if we could try to keep our speakers to about 10 minutes to give us a quick overview, 5 minutes of questions, we could. And also, I know it says typically we're noon to 1, but most dockets in court don't start till 1:30. And, I'm willing to go to 1 or 1:20 next time so we can add a little bit more wiggle room there. But it really would, I think these are all great suggestions. And actually I said 4, it's really the gang thing could be very simple. So that I don't know that would take 15 or 20 minutes. I agree with Professor Phillips. I think that's a fairly quick thumbs up or down. The CPOS discussion from the new chair, 15 to 20 minutes. Somebody from KBI about data collection, 15 to 20 minutes. And then somebody from CSG, if they could give us that update on what does a program, if you're starting one from whole cloth, what do you need? So say the experts nationwide. And I do agree, Scott, that if we could get someone from Topeka to give a quick overview, this is what's worked here, this is what we needed, this is our funding stream, that kind of a thing. It could at least inform the kind of recommendations we make to the legislature. I don't know that we're going to come out with a fully formed piece of legislation from this. That's fairly optimistic, but we could certainly come up with good information for the commission to recommend on, sort of a pass through onto the legislature. That seemed like a workable plan for everybody. Okay, seeing thumbs up. The only thing really that's not been touched upon then is the traffic issue and traffic offenses, et cetera. And candidly, that is a, you know, I've mentioned it in some circles. People go, that's pretty mundane conversation. That's not nearly, you know, well, I'm talking about, you know, racial issues. And here we're talking about, you want to talk about something as mundane as traffic tickets. I disagree. I think traffic's where the average citizen, and especially people who live in communities of color, come into contact with the criminal justice system. So it is a big issue, I believe. I'm certain of it. That being said, it is such a big issue. I'm not sure that one subcommittee that's tackling all these other things can really do adequate work there, other than to make the generalized claim or general request that further attention be given to minimizing the impact financially, especially that traffic offenses can have on communities of color and communities in general. I was at the bill that was passed this last year, that I think it was discussed at length in the commission, taken up by several champions in the House and the Senate last year and passed through. That would allow people to get reinstated at a reduced fee and fine structure. There was a public gathering Saturday in Wichita, and myself, the sheriff, chief of police, Senator Aletha Pascal, and any number of other folks were there, and had a tremendous turnout with people who, you know, are severely impacted by this. I will say, just anecdotally, one of the things that really surprised me was how many adults, folks with gray in their hair, who told me they'd never had a license. It was always seen as a insurmountable thing, some sort of unintelligible thing to go do, which I guess I didn't realize that level of distrust or there have been so many bad experiences with just the traffic system. A lot of people just never even got licenses in their career, in their lives. So all I'm getting at is that's the last thing on our old business here, but I think that is worthy of a much larger discussion than we might be able to do. Jennifer, were you going to say something?
Yeah, you know, I don't know the scope of the challenges in this area in Kansas specifically, but I do know that some locations, so I used to work in Ohio, and the Attorney General's office in Ohio had a safe surrender program. So they would work with different counties to have agencies, community resource folks, child support folks, help resolve low-level warrants. So to try to avoid folks being incarcerated, where they can go on a safe surrender day, and all of the folks who need to be at the table are at the table. They can get the resources they need and get warrants resolved, and kind of chart out a plan forward. So I have seen things around that. I'm also not sure about the extent of kind of in Kansas, how much different offenses include loss of a license, which could be a statutory fix. So for example, in some states, there are a lot of drug crimes and things like that, that if you're convicted, you automatically lose your license for so many months. And is that beneficial? Does that need to be rectified to reduce the amount of collateral consequences and allow folks to function effectively? So there's sometimes statutory fix around that for different offenses that aren't driving related, and reducing the driving without a license issues.
Professor Phillips, you were going to say something?
Oh, I'm just nodding my head because all of that rings true. I think there's this, if I recall correctly, there's a section in the sentencing guidelines part of the statutes where if you're caught with drugs in your car and you're transporting drugs, you can lose your license because of the drugs in your vehicle. So there are some of those statutes in Kansas. The other thing I think I tend to agree with you, Chairman, that traffic stops are huge. That's where, I mean, I just pulled this off of my shelf. Chuck Epp, who is a professor here at KU, in our public administration department has a book out on how police stops define race and citizenship. I mean, it's all up to law enforcement officers to decide who to pull over, and it's not a coincidence that we call it driving while black. That people get pulled over because of their race. I just am not, which is a huge problem that I'm pretty passionate about. I just don't know how we solve that in the time that we have between now and December. I mean, I was actually wondering about how the other commission that the governor put together with Sharon Portillo, and I forget who else was on that, how that commission, if they had any suggestions. I just don't know that that's something that we can tackle in this, what we have left, 2 months maybe?
And beyond that, there's the elephant in the room on all of these is money.
Yes,
You know, when you start taking away fees and fines, et cetera, well, that because the criminal justice system is not a line item in the budget the way it probably should be, frankly. And a lot of its funding comes from fees and fines from traffic court. Every time we talk about reducing these things, then there's also a consequent reduction in fees and funding for probation and all, you know, so.
court
Yeah,
services, OJA, right, clerk's offices, all of that was funded through those things.
yeah. So I agree. I think if nothing else, we may need to just fashion a statement that says that assuming we vote on it. I mean, but I share your concerns but something that says we encourage the commission to include in its final report a statement that simply says the ongoing efforts to address traffic issues in the state should be a priority for the legislature moving forward. You know, even something like that, just to shed some light on it or keep the pedal down on that issue, I think would be beneficial. So, Senator Haley, you raised your hand? No, okay.
No, I was moving that. I'm just, this is, I mean, this is, I mean, this discussion is just, I can't tell you how pleased I am to hear it unfold. Yes, we do look at the balance or the imbalance that would be struck by a reduction in fees that are onerously disparate to a certain community. But then we have to ask that teleological question: is that right in the first place, to take a certain sector of our community, of our state, based on demographic, to disproportionately fund our judicial system and law enforcement through our docket fees and other fees that we impose? So I didn't mean to raise my hand. It probably was just some shout going up from my internally from my head that caused that to do that. And I just appreciate the dialogue so much. Really, I do. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I will say too, I think it's just a larger issue altogether. I mean, race, absolutely, but I would tell you I would venture to guess a third of the people that were at the meeting I was at Saturday who were there, and we had lawyers set aside, you know, who Katie or Department of Revenue had set up that allowed them to log in. And if you sit down with one of the 3 lawyers that was there to do pro bono work that day, they can tell you what you owe, and they were able to get information. Anyway, it was very helpful. But I'd say a third of the folks who were there, I would have described as working poor, or just the very lowest on the socioeconomic scale, white and black. Just, you know, you had folks, the poor in general, obviously communities of color take the brunt of that. But, you know, $150 speeding ticket to a lot of folks is no big deal. To some folks, it's devastating. And so they just don't show up because they don't know how to deal with it. And then the next thing you know, it's exponentially worse. So anyway, I'm preaching to the preacher here, but I agree with you. I don't want the system to be used as a sword in this respect. So, all right. Well, it's 12:55. Good discussion today. I think we've probably gotten as much done as I think we can today, but I want to leave that for the floor. Anyone else have thoughts? Anything else we haven't discussed? I think the first meeting we had last month, we sort of brainstormed what topics can we discuss, and we've come back to them today. That being said, it wasn't a speak now or forever hold your peace moment. I mean, if there's other topics that someone wants us to address in this regard, I'd let me know, or let me know at the next meeting. But as with each passing day, it gets harder for us to address it vigorously before the reports do. But anything else that anyone thinks we need to readdress, or anything else, you know, Representative Owens, Senator Haley, folks who were in the legislature, things that took place in the last session that maybe just didn't get across the line, but you think need to be brought up again. Last couple minutes here before we wrap it up. Anything else? Okay.
Hey, Chairman, this is Natalie Nelson from Legislative Research. I just wanted to jump in and correct something that I said that was wrong. Spence Cohen is not a member of this subcommittee, so just for the record.
No problem. Well, I will note that Spence is not tardy. He is just not supposed to be here. So, okay,
We'll be more diligent on reporting on that committee.
it's all right. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody's time. Not a lot of us today, but a robust discussion. I think we are making progress. I think the ideas, though, of getting some of these speakers in is a great thing. Just to put a fine point on that, I'll talk to Kirk Thompson. If Representative Owens, I don't know if your chief has moved to Hutch or if he stayed in Heston, but I trust you. There you go.
I'd be happy to reach out to him.
Perfect. And then the folks from CSG, if you could get somebody lined up to speak next time about the issue of co-responder programs. And then I don't have a connection. Scott Schultz, if you have a connection, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm still here, and I think that Bill Persinger was actually working with them, and I just sent an email to him and CC'd you and Natalie to see whether or not he has any, whether Vallejo actually keeps any. Otherwise, I would think TPD probably does too, but
Yeah.
he may be our closest or easiest connection there.
Okay. And really, like I said, what I'm interested in is how to make it go, not spending a lot of time because we've got limited time. Praising the virtues of it. I think we get that. It's just, let's get it. What do communities who don't have, what do they need to make it go? So, okay. All right. Well, thank you all for your time and have a good afternoon. And we'll see you at one of the many subcommittee or commission meetings coming up. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good week.